Hello everyone. This is not a story for the faint of heart. Today, we will be stepping into the darkness of the most gruesome cases, where evil not only exists, but also leaves bloody and haunting traces. This is Real Gruesome Murder Cases, a series of true stories about murders that made the whole world shudder. If you are ready to face the cold truth and the gruesome corners of humanity, come with me to delve deeper into each case. Trial by Egotism. The Honorable Judge Harold Brybar strode to the bench bearing a coy smile. The court knew that smile well, as did millions watching on view screens all over Mars, as did tens of millions back on Earth who wouldn't get the feed for another hour or so. They also knew the arch of his thick gray eyebrows, the well-trimmed salt and pepper hair he'd gracefully let recede, the petite spectacles he wore when reading, and the mild way he cleared his throat to bring the whole courtroom to attention. In offense to all known theories of jurisprudence, Judge Harold Brybar was a celebrity judge, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. As Brybar sat down, he produced his legendary gavel from the folds of his cloak. It was the gavel that had sent General Sabrina Gallo to the slammer. It was the gavel that had brought justice to the ungrateful eight. It was the gavel that had, so mournfully, let the Scarlet Assassin walk on a series of technicalities. Years ago, a rookie reporter dubbed it the cinematic hammer of justice, and the moniker stuck, though Brybar only laughed and shook his head ruefully when asked about the moniker. Chekhov would have surely side-eyed this fabled instrument of law and order. "This should be the final day of the trial," Judge Brybar said, after customarily clearing his throat. "If Miss Toddle's statement runs long, we'll cut for lunch at 11. How long do you think you'll go?" He flashed a smile at the defendant. "An hour should do it." Marissa Towdle flashed a smile right back between lips stained dark red. She came to court in a maroon pantsuit with a long matching jacket that almost reached the ground, and dark lipstick and fingernail polish to match. Stylish, but for her, understated. Earlier in the trial, she'd favored brighter colors, including a pastel blue skirt that drew immense attention, much of it mockery, in the press. She'd been on trial for previous burglaries and had proven as much a celebrity as the judge overseeing her case. That she'd taken to defending herself only heightened the circus atmosphere. You couldn't wish for a more theatrical combination of defendant and judge. "Excellent," the judge said. "That would mean the jury can deliberate over lunch. A smooth running ship at last." The assembled audience, standing room only, laughed nervously, revealing how much tension the courtroom held. In theory, Towdle should be guilty as a Labrador by a demolished birthday cake. She'd been caught red-handed in the most elaborate and movie-like theft in the history of the planet after all. But many speculated Towdle had a trick or two up her sleeve. Gambling websites gave her a 15% chance of acquittal, and even a 5% chance of escape. The third prime participant in this drama feels ordinary by comparison. Veronica Brief charted a conventional path as she rose through the prosecutorial ranks. Top grades, hard work, schmoozing, ambition, and a photographic memory. There's little reason to elaborate on her story. Veronica had aimed for calm, efficient, and professional as her persona. She let Marissa and Judge Brybar provide the entertainment. The stately prosecutor drew little mention in the tabloids despite overseeing the case of the millennium. And she'd presented a good case, which was easy in one sense because of how strong the evidence was. Someone had stolen the twin pins of Mars, diamond-encrusted spikes that ceremonially finished the oxygen dome of the first Martian city. Marissa Towdle was a known high-stakes burglar and ex-con, She'd been present at the benefit concert from which the pins were stolen. She'd purchased the chemicals needed for the distracting foam bomb that had gone off at the concert. And most damningly, one of the diamond pins had been found in her very apartment. The list of witnesses and items in evidence is so long that, again, there's little need to go into much detail. The most troubling possibility was that if the jury liked Marissa too much, that they were simply so entertained, they might ignore the evidence and vote for acquittal. Today, the defendant would make her last appeal. Today, Marissa Towdle, who'd fired her lawyers after just 4 days into the proceedings, would make her closing argument. She wasn't a lawyer, had never been to law school, and committed innumerable mistakes of law throughout the trial, but she still possessed the supernatural confidence of a legendary burglar, so she'd plowed ahead, learned from each mistake of process, always found a way to laugh with the audience as she suffered a series of sustained objections against her. The Red Planet stood entranced, listening to how she would make her final plea. Marissa Towdle rose. She was quite short, but cut a dramatic figure nonetheless. She strode to the center of the room to address the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my honored peers, good morning to you. Also, good morning to everyone watching in the live audience in this wonderful city of New Olympus and all across Mars and our sister planet of Earth. Also, a quick shout out to anyone reading the transcript in the future. That's serious dedication." Laughter. The prosecution has done a thorough job presenting the evidence against me, and I would be foolish to claim no fear. They found one of the diamond pins at my apartment. Can you believe my incredulity? Without that one piece of evidence, all they have is hearsay and circumstance. And who hasn't been hurt by hearsay and circumstance? I was sorely mistreated on the day they overturned my home. Veronica had decided early in the trial not to be surprised by anything Marissa said. Here she was, starting her final defense by bringing up the single strongest piece of evidence against her, submerging it in a strange cocktail of jokes and grievances. Still, she was as oddly compelling as she'd been the whole trial. Have I mentioned how good you look, jury? The fall weather has really brought out your fashion sense, such lovely browns and greens. I'm going to miss you all when this trial is finally over. And soon it will be over, won't it? Oh, I don't know if this is legal. Is it legal to compliment and reminisce with the jury? It is if there's no objection from the prosecution. This was the judge, now looking in Veronica's direction with a raised eyebrow. All around the court, Veronica felt all eyes suddenly on her, and it was true. She could object for relevance or ingratiation, which Mars had added to the legal code 50 years ago. No objection, Veronica said after a pause worthy of a sitcom, to titters and laughter from the audience. She hadn't intended to object at all, no matter how wild the defendant got. It's considered poor form to object during closing arguments, unless the faults are egregious. Plus, ordinary folks see through flattery and immaterial wanderings most of the time, and that should be especially so in this case. Marissa wasn't just on trial for grand theft, but also for assault. When she'd set off the foam bomb at the dedication ceremony, 3 people had been injured, and many dozens more might have been. These charges alone could add up to decades behind bars. A jury might excuse burglary if they liked a defendant, but harming innocent spectators? No way, Veronica thought. Marissa had avoided lengthy prison sentences from previous burglaries through clever negotiating, and because she'd always been careful to avoid violence. Now, she might be mere hours from a lifetime in prison. How was she so calm? At this point, Marissa had moved on to a PowerPoint presentation, with a selection of quotes projected onto the large screen across from the jury, with certain words highlighted for effect. The rotten witch made all the plans and said it would be an easy score without any risk of harm to anyone. That's what one of my supposed henchmen said about me, if you'll remember. I don't see why that insult was necessary. Read the next quote, this time from a witness who supposedly saw me outside the concert hall. She was laughing like a hyena, or like some evil witch. With the shouting inside, I could barely hear her, but I was close enough I could just make out the cackle. I could read each and every one of these quotes, each more demeaning than the last, but you can look over the full list if you've got the stomach for it. So many horrible things said about me, which I don't mind. I can accept taunts and jeers. But it is certainly interesting that so many of these witnesses couldn't help but include spiteful, disparaging remarks. And you'll notice how many bring out the W word. It almost feels like they were coordinating their testimony somehow. Veronica caught a glimpse of the jury. She read ambivalence on their faces, scowls, smirks, narrowed, focused eyes, and furrowed brows. They were all paying attention, but none appeared sympathetic, and only a few seemed amused. She found it galling that Marissa would imply misconduct from the prosecution. Early in the legal process, Marissa had tried to trade the location of the second diamond pin for legal protection, which Veronica would never have agreed to, not leastwise because the police were convinced they could lean on her conspirators to produce the second pin, an assumption which, 7 weeks later, had not come true. Those negotiations were inadmissible at trial, but made Marissa's attempts to cast the prosecution as corrupt all the more preposterous. Marissa knew she was guilty, and knew the prosecution knew she was guilty. And then there's the matter of the diamond pin of peace, found in my apartment, right under my very bed. It's the linchpin of the case against me. But do you find that likely? That a supposed master criminal would conceal the single most damning evidence in the most obvious and cliched place to hide something? Ha! And that underscores my next point, that the diamond pin of prosperity is yet to be found. If I had stolen them both, why hide one in an obvious place, then another where the police have yet still to find? I'm not going to accuse anyone else of being the real thief, and therefore the person who planted the evidence while keeping half the spoils for themselves. Not right at this moment anyway. I don't have the resources of the police or prosecutors to chase leads and likely suspects. But how can you not be suspicious of these circumstances? Marissa had raised her voice by this point. Despite her grandiosity, she'd kept her tone civil, even playful. But now she strode about the floor, her jacket swirling in great red arcs. She turned to the prosecution table and approached Veronica, though even with her heels, she stood barely a few inches taller than her adversary sitting up straight. Marissa leaned over the table between them. Veronica held her gaze in as steely a manner as she could muster. She wasn't intimidated, but feared smiling at this bit of theatrics, which might send the wrong message to the jury. They've stacked things so thoroughly against me. A huge team of cops and prosecutors all working to dig up evidence. 3 of my friends called to testify against me. Hundreds of hours of security video. Reams of texts stolen from my phone. All this effort searching for any slip-up, inconsistency, or wrong place, wrong time circumstance. And in the end, their whole case rests on a single, dubious discovery. Marissa whirled on Veronica, her jacket cape swirling like a tornado. She approached the judge, held his eye contact for many moments. Veronica couldn't read her face with her back turned, but Judge Brybar's eyes narrowed, turning from amused to suspicious to worried. Only then did worry enter Veronica's own mind. Could Marissa really have a grand plan to turn the trial on its head, or even to escape? Everyone in this courtroom stands against me. I've been fighting every official and advocate aligned for a single purpose. These whole 7 weeks I've fought. She stood right before the judge now, a dark red fingernail pointed but a meter from his face. "Control yourself," the judge warned, his voice steady. Marissa slowly retreated her hand to her chest, but kept the finger out. Then she approached still further and placed her hands on the edge of the bench. Judge Brybar screwed his face up in an apoplectic grimace. "I kindly ask you to back away," the judge said with barely concealed rage. And Marissa did so. She turned slowly, her jacket an eddy rather than a hurricane. The whole audience appeared to exhale at this drawdown in tension. The calm wouldn't last. The true thief, the true mastermind, is in this courtroom right now. Marissa raised her hand, extending that damning index finger clad in crimson, thrusting it high in the air like the barrel of a smoking gun. The courtroom turned deathly quiet. Marissa twirled her finger in the air, once, twice. A woman screamed in the audience. Several people stood. Veronica noticed the judge fumbling for his gavel. Why was his gavel not to hand? Veronica's photographic memory went to work, rewinding to a minute prior. The gavel had disappeared from the moment Marissa had placed her hands on the bench. When she'd made that dramatic turn, she must have. "Approach, Your Honor," Veronica called out, but was drowned out by the growing tumult of the audience. She stood and shouted, "Approach, Your Honor! Your gavel! She has your gavel in her sleeve!" The chaos intensified, cries and laughter mixing together. Judge Brybar's eyes were wide as Phobos and Deimos in the Martian night sky. The bailiffs stood frozen for a moment, but one caught Veronica's eye. They nodded at each other and sprung into motion. Veronica charged. She couldn't say why, necessarily, but the thought entered her mind that perhaps this was a grand distraction to allow Marissa some clever escape, and that was just too much of an affront to the seasoned prosecutor. It was a breach of decorum to get involved in bailiff duties, but Veronica had been a track athlete in college and had taken basic police training. And there was so much energy in the courtroom. The bailiff, a stocky woman with a tight ponytail, whose expression almost never changed. Her name was Lawrence, Veronica wanted to say, got there first and held Marissa under the arms. Marissa was making a show of struggling without really struggling, calling her capture a brute. Veronica held Marissa's eye contact while she riffled in her sleeves, producing the lost gavel within seconds. "I believe this belongs to you," she said with what she hoped was cinematic showmanship as she cast the gavel onto the bench. Adjourned. Adjourned. Take the defendant into custody. The judge had retrieved the cinematic hammer of justice and was banging it on the bench like a woodpecker. Slowly, the veins in his forehead receded as the bailiffs took Marissa away. Next, the judge leaned down to whisper to Veronica, "Meet me in chambers. I fear we're looking at a mistrial." Of course, a mistrial. Was that Marissa's plan? But how would this help her? More chances to escape, maybe, but then she'd surely earned tighter security from this fiasco. She'd wait in prison for the next trial, and the evidence against her would be as strong as ever. Why had she done this? Why had she made such a scene? But then, she'd so loved playing the lawyer, stirring up drama and having all eyes on her. These last 7 weeks may have been the most exciting of an already legendary life. With this performance, Marissa Towdle hadn't earned her freedom, but she'd earned another shot at being the center of the known universe, escaping neutrality. "Good morning, Derek." "Morning, Doc. How are you feeling today? Any more thoughts of harming?" I had to interrupt her. Dr. Fuller was one of the better shrinks I'd had to deal with, but she was a real job's worth about following the script. It would be the same old introductory questions. She couldn't help but tick those boxes at the top of the day's crisp white form, still warm off the copier, but would be terrified of doing so unless I actually said the words. I struggled to find the patience to verbalize my repeated and identical statements. Ever noticed how stark our world has become? I asked out of the blue, cutting her off to her obvious annoyance. She sighed, then visibly gathered up a well-practiced decorum. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, abandoning the prescribed sheet for later and joining my real conversation. I was proud of her. "I mean that when we were children, the world was full of color. I'd wait to cross the road and see cars of gold, green, red, and blue fly past. I'd look down the street, and every house would be trimmed with sage guttering, burgundy window frames, or dark blue front doors. My bedroom was even painted a musky orange and had deep brown carpets at one point. It really offset the crimson of my lava lamp and the teal of my inflatable couch. But today, what do you see when you look around?" I still see some of those things, but you're right. Most things are far more tastefully done these days. Do you miss your childhood? Would colorful surroundings bring you more comfort as you had back then? Tasteful, classy, reserved, miserable, soul-destroying, I said, hammering my point home and ignoring her textbook questions. Dr. Fuller really needed to up her game, but what could I expect from someone so new to the field and so young? "I bet you drive a white car, huh, Tasha?" "Dr. Fuller, please, Derek. Yes, I do. Why is that relevant?" "Well, I know for a fact that they've made white the cheapest option. For any splash of color whatsoever, you have to pay a premium now. Is it any wonder that every modern car you see in the road is now white?" "I suppose not. Most, like me, cannot afford the extra expense. What are you getting at here, Derek?" "Only that the world was fading, having its color drawn out, far before I was ever denied the sight of it." I did not register her next question. Her side of the conversation always included a question. I was distracted by the spontaneous idea that Dr. Fuller would have an office somewhere, and that there was a chance it might not be quite as bland as her car. Its walls might be covered in bright book spines, all in clear view from the comfortable, deep maroon couches. A myriad of certifications in shining wooden frames would sit side by side with calming vistas, no doubt depicting an unnamed ocean of calming blue spotted with colorful sailboats. I imagined it as being quite pleasant. Perhaps she was right. A throwback to my early years, drenched in technicolor, might have offered me some contentment, useless to contemplate. I would never again see such a sight in this life. My imagined home for the dear doctor was a far cry from our current reality. Whitewashed concrete encased the bare room I was forced to meet her in daily. Gray, steel chairs and a matching table offered the only tint to the otherwise monochrome box. Tasha's wardrobe of endless white blouses and gray skirts might have been a choice, but I expected it was simply a subconscious effort to conform to the washed-out world that we both inhabited. "Did you hear what I said, Derek?" she asked, ducking her head to try and catch my vacant eyes. "No," I answered honestly. "Where were you?" Credit. Where credit is due, the doc had some skills. Instead of accelerating with her own agenda, she was able to pull into my lane at a moment's notice. Time to knock her off the road. "I was imagining where I would find you, outside of this place. Without these," I said, staring her directly in the eye and pulling sharply on the handcuffs that strapped my wrists to my chair. The loud and sudden clink of the metal chain startled her, and I watched as her pupils dilated in fear. It was the little pleasures. Telling the truth, but in a way that elicited the reaction I desired. It was all the entertainment I could find anymore. I thought she was done after that. Figured she would flee, never to return, to be replaced with yet another box-checking drone, fresh out of shrink school, wanting to prove they could handle the worst of the worst. Instead, she surprised me. You will never again be without those, Derek, nor will you ever see the outside world freely. My job here is only to determine which walls will hold you. Do you understand that? Tasha said, setting her jaw and returning my stare. Always another question with Doc Fuller. I understand completely. I am not a simpleton, I snapped. Her resilience annoyed me. I agree. It's quite the opposite, I think. You are clearly very intelligent, Derek. After these few sessions, I can see you are more than capable of self-reflection. So shall we stop wasting each other's time and get back on task? Pass your psych evaluation, and I'll put my recommendation in that you be transferred to Parkhurst and allowed regular yard time. Keep driving away your doctors and avoiding the issue with talk of cars and old bedroom decor, and you will remain here, isolated on the psych ward, for the rest of your sentence. For the rest of my life, I corrected her. If that is what you want, then I may as well leave now. She didn't move, a weak gambit that rarely fooled children. It never convinced mine. To use it, you had to be willing to follow through. I could never bring myself to let them out of my sight, much as Dr. Fuller would never have the courage to walk out of that door on the gamble that I'd call her back. I decided to give her the victory anyway. Let her feel powerful for a moment, before I took it all away. It would be preferable to see the blue of the sky again, I conceded. White rooms with gray furniture, guarded by monochrome uniforms, and visited by equally starkly adorned doctors, I said, gesturing at her up and down. I might as well be in heaven already for the level of cloud cover that surrounds me. Do you believe in heaven? Tasha asked, and just like that, with yet another question, the session resumed. It was the most personal question she had asked me yet. Her confidence was growing. I could not allow it to dwarf my own. Number she would need to regain her fear of me soon. I refused to admit that her earlier stoicism had ruffled me, yet I felt a growing urge to get the upper hand once more. She knew all too well I could never get close enough to harm her physically. I was too notorious for that kind of carelessness from the guards. I'd need to break her from a distance, and I planned to. Of course, don't you? I countered. I'm not sure. I am yet to hear a convincing argument either way. Coward, I whispered. Belief is not something you can be convinced of. Do you believe you are destined for heaven, Derek? Why not? I asked. God forgives us all for the weakness of our flawed human existence. All we need do is seek and accept it. And you have asked for forgiveness? She ventured. I could hear the eagerness in her voice, the building excitement that it could be that easy, that I could give her what she needed to scribble on her form and sleep easy, knowing she had succeeded in bringing a lost cause back from the brink. For what? I feigned ignorance. Baiting her was so easy. For your crimes. Come on, Doc. You can say it. I paused for only a second before exploding forward across the table as far as my clasped wrists would allow me, raining spittle that peppered her damn forms as I roared my best imitation of a literary detective. For murder most foul? I almost missed her reaction for my laughter. Psychologists were such fun. When will they realize that some behaviors are chosen simply for the entertainment of it, rather than the result of some past trauma. As it was, my eyes cleared from joy-induced tears just in time to see her recovering herself and returning to a normal position after trying in panic to escape her pale, metal seat. "You can try to scare me all you like, Derek," she said with breaths that had not quite slowed, "but I won't be leaving. Not as a result of any action of yours. I am your last chance, and I don't intend to be the reason this system fails you." All mirth left me, and my face dropped into a practiced blankness. I decided in that moment it was time to try a little more earnestly, no longer for my own enjoyment, but because I knew a truth that Tasha had yet to realize. I was never going to be transferred, no matter what I revealed to her. The only way I was ever going to see anything but the consuming whites of my cell again would be by my own hand. So, there was little point in her dance. I needed only one thing from the good doctor, and to get it, I wanted her distracted, nervous, and off-script. Straight-backed, head high, and glasses once more pushed up on her nose, Tasha Fuller tried her best to ignore my outburst and proceeded to ask her next question. "So, whether to God or man, you understand that you need to ask forgiveness for the deaths you caused?" "No," I said musically. "I never stated the reason I would require forgiveness. No, my prayers are more centered around lust and gluttony. There are few pleasures left to me other than my imagination and my meals," I said, winking at the pretty little doctor. An exaggeration for her benefit. I could not truthfully admit to enjoying the white mush of potato and gray mystery meat I ate daily. Thinking of her, though, that worked. I liked them pale. "Derek, you are incarcerated here for the murder of your wife and 2 daughters. Do I need to explain to you again the gravity of your situation? If myself and my colleagues cannot determine an underlying cause for your violent behavior, then you are facing a lifetime of being classed as criminally insane. Would you rather a continuation of the treatment you get here, or are you willing to embrace the chance we are giving you? At Parkhurst, you might truly find rehabilitation. All of that is at your discretion, Doc. I am here, I am an open book. I have never lied. Not once. I pride myself on honesty," I said, raising my chin in challenge. "If you want the answers you seek, you simply need to ask the right questions, instead of these meaningless generalities." I watched her scour her memory and her notes, her eyes darting, looking for the truth in my words, until my meaning dawned on her. "Why? Why did you do it?" she asked immediately, blessedly direct. "Finally," I sighed. "Sometimes, after all that education, all that introspected study and exploration of the human condition, all you need do is ask a simple, straightforward, common sense and normal question. Why did I kill them? I was saving them." I heard the click of her pen and the scrawling of notes behind the steel clipboard. Now I had her, beyond her strict training, out of her depth. "Saving them from what?" she asked, the interest bright in her eyes. "They were under the power of demons. Their lives were already forfeit. I released their souls from their torture to be claimed by the sky, where they wait for me to join them. I would be there already, if I were a stronger man." I shook my head and dropped my gaze, genuinely lamenting at my failure. Her scribbling continued for a few moments longer, before stilling the room to silence. "You thought your family were possessed by demons?" Dr. Fuller attempted to confirm. "Are you stupid?" I yelled, snapping my head back up to meet her scrutiny. It was the only part of my body I was allowed autonomy over during the sessions. I didn't say possessed. I said they were under the power of demons. Through their muted screens, The endless stories pumped into their gray matter turned them into walking avatars for another's narrative. Their minds warped, their perception altered, and they were no longer the girls I knew. They began spouting the same garbage that was looping into our home from the black and gray bordered rectangles of controlled light. The only color in their lives coming from what was gifted by monsters via LED, while they systematically stole it from any other pursuit. My family became puppets to an evil's will. I took their souls and put them out of reach. I surrendered them into the protection of a power that exists in true light and color above our poisoned planet. I could feel my chest heaving. The passion from my torrent of words pumped through my veins. I could not stop the tears from streaming down my cheeks, the sobs from racking my body. My grief over the actions I had been forced to take broke free. It was real. I should not have had to take such drastic action, but it had been the only way. I heard the scrape of her chair as she pushed it back and rose, smelt the flowery perfume that wafted before her as she approached, and shuddered under the warmth of her hand on my shoulder. When the good doctor crouched and put her face on a level with mine, I hesitated. Her words were so kind. "It's all right now, Derek. I'm going to make sure you get the help you need." This would be a hard lesson for her to learn. I slammed my forehead into her glasses, shattering them against her face, and feeling the bone in her nose crack. It took a moment of delay for her body to catch up, but then quickly, crimson blood flowed down her face from her nose and the cuts around her eyes. I was not sure if it was hers or my own that I tasted on my cut lips. The deep red that painted our faces in unison was a desperately welcome tone amongst the stark. True color suddenly swamped the pallor of my world. It was glorious. It was relief. It was satisfaction. My head hit the back of my cell with such force that I feared the guards had already done the work for me. I laid still, stunned by the blow, and waited for my monochrome world to refocus. The white room and strong lights pierced inward, accelerating the headache that was to come. They would be back to take me to the infirmary soon enough. First, they would need to rescue poor Dr. Tasha Fuller from her minor injuries. She deserved their attention. She was the best shrink I'd ever had. She'd healed me and didn't even know it. From between my teeth, I dropped the shard of glass I'd bitten from her broken optics. I took it between my now free fingers and readied myself to join my family in salvation. From my body would birth a refuge of color amidst the sea of white. Just as they had, I would arise from a pool of bright crimson. Bathed at its center, I would finally be able to ascend to where a full spectrum of light would welcome me home, dressed for ruin. On a sticky Saturday evening in downtown Philadelphia, the line for Evie's Eden wrapped around the block. Blaring, fast-tempo music and strobing neon invaded the detectives' senses as they pushed their way through a throng of warm, gyrating bodies to take a seat at the bar. The stench of sweat and stale beer permeated the dark room, and the rush of frigid air from the vents above offered minimal relief from the stifling heat. The officers shouted to make themselves heard over the din, while several people almost knocked the men from their seats in their drunken attempt to squeeze between them and get the bartender's attention. The younger of the two men, a clean-shaven blonde with neatly combed hair and stern hazel eyes, tugged at his tie and scowled at a group of scantily clad women with neon-painted bodies as they approached him. They gave him sour looks and a few rude gestures in return before scampering off to find a more willing recipient of their affections. His partner looked down on most of the room at almost 6 feet. Gray streaked through his dark, purposely disheveled hair, and there was a hard glint in his cobalt eyes. His broad shoulders and well-built barrel chest, along with the faint scars littering his arms, made Vincent look less approachable than the blonde detective. The illusion was broken by the deep laugh lines etched into his cheeks as he chuckled and teased his dour partner. You didn't have to scowl at them like that. The poor girls were just being friendly. The blonde scoffed, rolling his eyes as he said, I'm not interested in their kind of friendship. Besides, we're here to work, not socialize, remember? Speaking of, should we really be consorting with criminals to solve cases? Vincent ordered a Corona and lime from a bartender even taller than him, with bubblegum pink and deep purple hair, styled in a short mohawk. He accepted the drink with a charming grin and left a generous tip before facing his partner, ignoring his disapproving glare. Criminals make the best informants. This one has helped us with a lot of cases. Her information network is invaluable. The younger detective grit his teeth, holding back an argument. No matter his feelings, the boy had to accept that their case had gone from nearly solved to stone cold in less than 24 hours. They needed whatever help they could get. Vincent's partner tugged at his tie. Sweat rolled down the boy's neck and stained his collar. He had tried to convince him to change out of his uniform, but was unsurprised when he refused. He wondered if the stubborn boy regretted it now with the sweltering heat pressing in on them. Vincent downed his drink and ordered another while his partner gave in, removing his tie and unbuttoning the top 2 buttons. The young detective barked another question before Vincent could comment. Where is this informant then? Every minute we waste here is another our suspect has to flee the country. Oh, I don't think we have to worry about that. She should be here any... Ah, there she is. They turned their attention to the top of a metal staircase at the back of the club. Vincent's throat felt dry despite the 2 drinks he'd already finished as he watched his old friend step through the VIP entrance. She gave her white suede jacket to the doorman with an alluring smile, then turned to face the officers as she descended the stairs. Diamond-studded gold stilettos clicked against the metal as she went. Her strapless, midnight pantsuit with a plunging neckline swayed around her ankles and long legs, but cinched tightly at her waist to accentuate wide hips and hug her chest. The fabric shimmered under the strobing neon lights, and the diamond choker that cascaded down her throat like a waterfall and nestled between her breasts flashed brightly. Smooth olive-toned skin contrasted the gleaming jewels perfectly. Bright copper ringlets spilled partially over one shoulder. The rest pulled back with a clip to show off the shaved right side of her head. Russet-painted lips with a prominent cupid's bow, dark, thick lashes, and a chocolate smoky eye highlighted her high cheekbones and bright, electric blue eyes. Vincent turned to face his partner as he scoffed and said, "You're joking." "Nope." "Detective, I'd like you to meet Evelyn Ross." "Evelyn, this is my new partner, Connor Williams." Connor was so distracted by her appearance that he hadn't realized she was walking right toward them. Evelyn smiled coyly and extended an intricately manicured hand. Tiny rhinestones were arranged in a rose design on every other stiletto-shaped nail, which were painted to match her eyes. Her breathy tone was deeper than Vincent remembered, and laced with expertly veiled sarcasm. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Detective." Reluctantly taking her proffered hand, Connor forced an awkward smile and said, "Likewise." Her lips twitched with amusement as she dropped his hand, then turned to speak to Vincent with something akin to fondness. "Join me for a drink?" "Of course." Evelyn lifted a panel and moved behind the bar towards a burgundy-painted steel door, Vincent 2 steps behind her. Connor followed, but the senior detective shook his head and said, "Wait here. Get a drink or something. I won't be long." Then, before Connor had a chance to question him, Vincent followed the gang leader through the door. As the steel door to Evelyn's office closed behind him with a click, a chill washed over Vincent's face and arms, leaving goosebumps in its wake. A faint aroma of vanilla and dark cherries replaced the reek of sweat. Vincent's stiff shoulders relaxed at the familiar scent. 4 sleek leather armchairs surrounded a mahogany card table, and a personal bar stood in the far left corner. An ashtray made of cobalt glass sat on the table, clean and empty of any remnants. Vincent's fingers itched for the smokes tucked in his breast pocket. A single painting of a man and 2 women performing around a piano hung on the wall opposite him. It had hung there since the day it went missing from a museum in Boston some 30 years ago, when he was barely a thought. Evelyn's office was quiet, except for the clinking of glass as she poured them drinks. The reinforced concrete walls, painted evergreen, blocked out all trace of music or chatter from the club. Vincent sunk into the cool, smooth leather, stifling a sigh. Evelyn sauntered over to the table, sitting on top directly in front of him and crossing her legs before handing him his glass. Vincent enjoyed the bitterness of the bourbon as it washed over his tongue and slid down his throat. She always did have the best taste in liquor. Vincent watched his old friend curiously as she set the glass aside and leaned close to pull 2 camel blue 100s and a lighter from his front pocket. Her lips just shy of grazing his stubbled cheek, and the heady aroma of vanilla and dark cherries briefly overwhelmed him. Electric blue eyes dancing with mirth bore into his as she slipped the cig between his teeth and lit it for him. Then, a rush of clarity and disappointment hit hard as she sat back to light her own. Curls of white smoke drifted from her lips and slowly filled the room. She stared him down with a raised brow until the cigarette had burnt down almost to the filter. Then she said, "So, you going to tell me what you want?" He raised his own brows and grinned teasingly as he answered, "Can't I just come to see an old friend?" Her unimpressed stare pulled a snort of laughter from his lips. She held her hand out expectantly and retorted, "Not when you have your dog waiting outside." Vincent relented with a sigh and pulled a file from inside his jacket, which she snapped from his fingers and threw open on the table next to her. The detective lowered his leg from the table and leaned forward to look over its contents, which she was flipping through with a carefully placid expression. The faces of 15 young women stared up at him, all of whom had gone missing within the last 6 months. The final photograph in the file was a mugshot of a man with beady gray eyes, greasy black hair, a pudgy face, and a sad, wispy little mustache. Vincent watched Evelyn's face carefully as her bright eyes paused on his picture, looking for any sign of recognition. If she did know the man, she wasn't giving it away, so he decided to probe her a little. "He's our main suspect. Goes by the name Rob, full name Robert Carroll. We've been tracking him down for a month, even got a hit on his hideout. Then we go in for the raid last night, and he's gone without a trace, so now we've hit a dead end. Do you recognize him?" Evelyn placed the picture back in the file, closed it, and took a generous sip from her drink before answering with a carefully even tone. "Afraid not, should I?" Vincent kept his own tone light as he pushed a little more. "Well, our files say he was one of your men until about a year ago. You've made it a point to know the names of everyone who works for you, haven't you?" The stare she pinned him with was bitterly cold, and her breathy voice took on a dangerous edge. "My organization doesn't deal in sex trafficking, a fact of which I know you're quite aware." "Yes. I'm also very aware of how you've punished those who have gone behind your back in the past, which is why I thought you might be able to help me find my suddenly missing suspect." The way her lips curled into a cruel sneer and her face turned away confirmed his suspicions that she was involved in Robert's disappearance. He sighed as he put out his cigarette, stood, and placed his arms on either side of Evelyn's hips, caging her in. She met his gaze with pursed lips as he asked, "Where is he, Evie?" The brazen woman leaned forward, trailing her sharp nails down the side of his jaw and over his chest. The coy smirk was back as she goaded him. "If I did know where he is, why should I hand him over to you? My men are mine to punish. That's the deal we made, remember? This isn't some petty drug dealer who stole from you. This man is responsible for the disappearance of 15 women that we know of. Who knows how many are still alive? Their families deserve justice." Evie rolls her eyes and scoffs at his appeal to her better nature. "Oh yes, sitting comfortably in a jail cell watching TV and getting 3 meals a day sounds like justice to me. Those families deserve to see him strung up and castrated. Try again." Vincent muttered a curse under his breath. If it were anyone else, he would just get a warrant, but Evelyn had become untouchable in the last few years. She had half the department, the mayor, even their state senator in her pocket. No one would dare sign a warrant against her, and she'd never take a threat from him seriously anyway. Time to change tactics. He wove his left hand into her ginger curls, running calloused fingers down the back of her neck. She tensed at the contact and repressed a shiver, but the goosebumps erupting over her arms and the excitement in her eyes gave her away. Encouraged, Vincent pressed his forehead against hers and whispered, "For me, then, as a favor to an old friend?" Her nails grazed his cheek again as she glowered. "Right. A friend who only comes to see me when he wants something. I feel a little used. Maybe you could give me something in exchange for my kindness." "What do you want?" He could guess the answer, had known her long enough to read the cues. In their previous meetings, she had always treated him like he was just another business partner, careful to keep her distance, giving no hint toward their long-standing and complicated friendship. Her forwardness now was telling, but he wanted her to say it. A selfish part of him needed her to admit that she had missed their closeness. Evie pushed him back into the chair, placing her knees on either side of his and pulling herself close. Her hand left his cheek, burying itself into his messy dark locks, gripping tight. Evelyn's electric blue eyes bore into his as she said, "Don't play dumb, Vince. It doesn't suit you, and I'm not in the mood for any more games." It was as much of an admission as he was going to get, and Vincent gave in with a groan as he pulled her lips to his in a bruising kiss, one that she returned with just as much vigor. Sometime later, Vincent watched with hazy satisfaction as the cobalt lace of Evie's lingerie disappeared back underneath her shimmering silk outfit. When Evie faced him with an equally sated look, he took a moment to appreciate her swollen, though still perfectly painted lips. Her hair, which he had torn from its clip, cascaded over her shoulders in a wild tangle of curls that made her look deceptively innocent. One could almost mistake her for a normal woman like this, instead of a dangerous crime boss. He wondered how many others had been permitted to see her that way, then scolded himself for hoping he was the only one. Vincent gave up that chance a long time ago, the day he swore his oath and joined the police force. Even this small indulgence was one he shouldn't have allowed himself. Once they finished straightening themselves, the pair looked at each other. Vincent lamented the return of Evelyn's closed-off expression that had been so open and vulnerable under his touch just a few minutes ago. But their time was up, and he came here for a reason. He struggled to keep the regret out of his tone as he asked, So, where can I find Mr. Carroll? Evelyn grinned playfully, hips swaying as she walked over to the bar, picked up a cell phone, and hit one of the speed dial numbers. After a few moments, the call picked up. Her orders were curt. "Bring him in." A side door that Vincent swore was a wall before opened, and a beat-up, barely conscious man who matched Rob's description to a T was shoved through by two bulky, suited thugs. Rob, with hands tied in front of him, collapsed to his knees. The thugs backed out without a word, and the door shut behind them, leaving nothing but smooth wall in its place. Evelyn laughed at his incredulous glare and said, "He's all yours, detective." Vincent rolled his eyes and strode over to the quickly fading man, tossing a sarcastic remark over his shoulder as he yanked the suspect up. "If you were going to hand him over anyway, why bother making such a fuss?" She giggled and walked over to open the burgundy door for him. He could already see his younger partner's expression morphing from annoyance to surprise and disbelief. Evie's breath at his ear sent a tingle down his spine. "Well, I thought he would make a good gift, but I wanted something too. Don't pretend you didn't enjoy it." He glanced to the right to meet her roguish grin as she continued, "Happy birthday." Connor took the unconscious trafficker off his hands, so Vincent turned back to Evie, who stood in the doorway with arms crossed, looking way too pleased with herself. He had forgotten that his birthday was tomorrow, and that it was something he and Evie shared. Vincent chuckled wryly and carded a scarred hand through his hair as he thanked her. Then he helped Connor drag their suspect out to the car, tossed him in the back, and settled into the driver's seat. From the corner of his eye, he saw his partner open his mouth, most likely to barrage him with questions. "Don't ask, it's complicated. But now you see what I was saying about Evelyn being one of our best informants. This isn't the first time she's handed our guy right to us, and it probably won't be the last." Connor didn't press for more information. He faced front with a thoughtful, almost conflicted look, and the ride to the station passed in silence. A silence that Vincent spent thinking of her, of their bodies pressed together, and foolishly wishing that he could do it again. The corpse in the city. The car comes to a halt at the far edge of the car park behind the bank. Tom sits quietly for a moment, as if in a trance, eyes forward. Only his left arm moves as he pulls on the handbrake. His eyes drop, focusing on his finger, pressing the button to release the boot lid. Slowly, he turns his head and glares. "Are you going to help me or not?" Jim lets out a puff of breath, leans his elbow on the car door, and stands up. His shoes crunch on the dark gravel. The car park is deserted. With wide eyes scanning the area, he moves to the rear of the car and begins wrestling with the wheelchair. This thing's worse than a deck chair. Jim whacks the wheelchair onto the ground and rubs his hands across the seat. As he finally gets it unraveled and stable, Tom opens the rear passenger side door and unclips the seat belt that is holding his Uncle Charlie upright. There is now an urgency in his manner. His breath comes in short, sharp bursts as he scurries round the back of the car, slams the boot shut, and then crawls along the back seat toward Uncle Charlie. "Line the chair up, Jim. You pull and I'll shove." Tom places one palm on Uncle Charlie's shoulder, one on his hip, groans and pushes. Jim tugs on a resistant arm and leg. Eventually, Uncle Charlie lands with a flop on the seat of the wheelchair. Jim tugs at the black overcoat to straighten him up, tucks in his arms, and lifts his feet onto the footrest. The sound of 4 doors and the boot closing echoes around the vacant car park and surrounding tall buildings. Yellow lights flash, showing the car is now securely locked. Standing back, Tom inspects his Uncle Charlie. "What does he look like?" "Dead," says Jim. "Pull his hat down over his face a bit more." Jim grabs the rim of the dark brown trilby and forces it over Charlie's head, then tilts it forward, covering Charlie's eyes. Tom takes another look and nods his approval. Gathering the strap from the back of the footrest, he buckles in his uncle's legs and then wraps a green tartan blanket tightly around them. He places a second blanket across his uncle's lap, covering his uncle's hands, and tucks that securely in down the sides. He straightens his back and breathes out a satisfactory sigh. "That'll do. I'm not happy doing this," says Jim. Tom's head spins round. "What? I'm not happy." "Well, you're a bit late telling me that. If you want some of the money, then you'd better start feeling happy right now." Jim mumbles under his breath, snatches the handles of the wheelchair, and begins pushing it across the loose tarmac of the car park toward the exit. His breathing becomes labored as the wheels spin in every direction. Charlie's head bobs up and down, loosening the trilby. Tom reaches over to straighten it out as Jim marches onwards toward the smooth pavement and the bank entrance. "I'll do all the talking. You just agree with me if they say anything to you." The blood drains from Jim's face. He says nothing. The 2 men push the wheelchair into the bank and join the queue. Jim hums to himself. Tom prods him. Jim stops humming. Tom fiddles with his Uncle Charlie's hat and the buttons of his overcoat. "Are you all right there, Charlie? Won't be long now, and we can get you home for a nice cuppa." Jim stares at Tom in disbelief. "He's a..." Tom kicks Jim in the shins. "Ouch." "Next." The cashier's voice booms across the interior of the bank. "Can we withdraw some money for my Uncle Charlie, please?" Tom points to Uncle Charlie in the wheelchair as he hands over the slip of paper. "Is he all right?" says the cashier. "He's had a stroke." "Sorry to hear that. It's a lot of money. We don't normally deal in such vast sums. He's going into a home tomorrow, and he needs the money to buy bits and pieces. You know what it's like. The care homes take all your dosh." "I do indeed." The cashier smiles. "If you'd care to wait, I'll sort this out for you. I see your uncle has already signed the slip." "Well done, Uncle Charlie." Tom bends over the wheelchair and pats the knees covered by the blanket. Charlie does not move. The cashier returns, stamps 3 sheets of paper, smiles, and hands over a large envelope full of notes through the slit underneath the protective glass. "Next. Come on, Jim. Let's get out of here." Tom grabs the handles of the wheelchair, spins it round, and heads for the exit. Jim scuttles along behind as Tom races along the pavement back toward the car park. Tom turns the wheelchair round tips it up onto the two back wheels, and drags it across the undulating ground. "We did it, Jim. We did it." Tom lets out a muffled laugh as he squeezes Jim's biceps. "Now, let's get the bastard back in the car." Tom checks the car park for pedestrians, then grabs the shoulders of his uncle. Jim unbuckles the legs and takes hold of the ankles. Between them, the two men heave the motionless mass into the car and slide it along the back seat. Jim spreads the two blankets on top and throws the wheelchair into the boot, then sinks into the passenger seat. The engine revs as Tom's white knuckles grip the steering wheel. The car speeds out the exit as the spinning tires kick up black tarmac. "What are you going to do with Uncle Charlie?" says Jim. "We've got to put him where they can't find him. There's a skip over there." Jim pointed. "Don't be daft. What about one of those giant green bins? There's one outside the Dog and Badger." "Are you mad? We can't just dump him anywhere. The police will find him. It's got to be somewhere. No one knows. We're going back to my place now, and we'll get rid of the knobhead later tonight. We've got to do it soon, before he turns black and smells." Tom stops the car in front of the garage, while Jim jumps out and opens the doors. The car shunts forward. Tom switches off the engine and gets out. He helps Jim secure the garage doors, and then they both go into the house. Jim sinks into the nearest armchair and immediately falls asleep. Tom races upstairs and jumps in the shower. He looks at the clock. They've got to be on the move before midnight. Tom carries the two suitcases downstairs and places them by the front door. He nudges Jim awake. In whispers, he tells Jim to hurry and organize himself, as they must deal with Uncle Charlie on the way to the airport. Jim rubs his eyes, goes into the kitchen, drinks a glass of water, grabs a biscuit, and then goes into the downstairs toilet. When he comes out, Tom tells him to take the two suitcases and put them in the back of the car, and not to forget the coil of rope that is hanging on a hook just inside the garage door. Jim puts the two suitcases and the coil of rope in the car. Tom starts the engine and backs out. He stops the car in the driveway, gets out, and checks the front door and closes the garage doors. "Where are we going, Tom?" "To that new industrial estate they're building on the outskirts of the city. It's on the way to the airport." They arrive at the new industrial estate, and Tom parks in a mud-filled lay-by near some railings at the end of the no-through road. "Get the rope and tie it tight round that shithead's chest. Make sure you go under his arms with it." Jim takes hold of the rope, pushes it under Charlie's back, and ties it in a tight knot over his chest. Tom takes a jemmy from the boot of the car and lifts a manhole cover and drags it to one side, close to the railings. Tom grabs the rope and lugs Charlie out of the car. Charlie hits the ground with a loud thud. Tom and Jim take an in-breath and look around. Silence. Tom continues dragging Charlie across the mud to the waiting hole. "Now you help me lower him in." Slowly, they eke out the rope and lower Charlie into the hole. Then secure the end of the rope onto a girder near the top and replace the cover. Will he be all right? Says Jim. What do you think? Says Tom. What'll I do with the blankets and the wheelchair? Says Jim. Tom points to some bushes behind the car. Throw them over there. Jim takes the blankets and slings them over the bushes, and then heaves the wheelchair in the same direction. Come on, Jim. We've got an hour's drive to the airport yet. Tom sits back in the seat on the airplane and sips his red wine. Jim's head falls forward, and loud snoring pours forth from it. Tom and Jim pull up a stool at the beach bar, their favorite haunt from previous Spanish excursions. Relaxed and smiling, they order a beer and proceed to quench their thirst for the high life. A heavy hand on their shoulder makes them jump as the tanned, bulky torso of a man stands between them. Don't normally see you two idiots here this time of year. Tom flops his head forward, clearly relieved to see it's a friendly face. Hi, Jack. No, you're right. Just visiting for a bit. And where's Charlie? The old bugger hasn't snuffed it, has he? Tom coughs. Jim swallows hard. No, he's fine. Didn't want to come. We've left him hanging around back home. A life of regret. When Raj had stealthily installed the I Spy 200 Vision Plus device on his wife's prescription glasses 2 weeks ago, he had no idea the device would enable him to watch and hear from her perspective. In a way, relive her last day alive. It was this morning Raj had received the Blue Dart courier with the pen drive containing the recording of the last day of Mira's life, her first and only day of wearing her glasses with the I Spy installed, just before the horrific car accident in which her car had been hit on the rear by another fast-moving vehicle. The police believed it to be a truck or a bus. Mira's Ford Endeavor had spiraled out of control and plunged into the river beside the road where she had drowned before she could be rescued. When her car had been pulled out, Raj had collected her things, including her glasses, and sent them to the technical facility of the I Spy Corporation in Mumbai, where the team had extracted the audio and video recorded on the device and mailed the file to Raj on a pen drive, along with a hefty check for their services. Taking a deep breath, Raj poured himself a glass of Sauvignon Blanc, which also happened to be Mira's favorite wine, for he needed his courage for what he was about to do. 3 large gulps and soothing warmth in his throat equipped him the nerve to plug in the pen drive and click on the folder dated July 24th, 2021. Wondering what their 16-year-old daughter Hina would think of this blatant breach of his wife's privacy, Raj pressed the play key. The world came into focus with dainty hands with black painted fingernails, placing the glasses over a nose. The camera panned to the left and focused on the other side of the bed, where a portly man lay sleeping with his mouth slightly agape. Raj watched the laptop screen with his heart racing as Mira leaned closer and kissed his bearded face before wrapping her gown around her body and proceeding towards the bathroom. He paused and watched the affectionate gesture again. Frowning, he must have been fast asleep because he didn't remember his wife kissing him in the past 3 months. Not since his near-fatal heart attack. Was there a corner of her heart that still loved him, even though she was cheating on him? Raj shrugged the thought away, and taking another sip of the wine, resumed playing the video. In the bathroom, Mira placed her glasses on the bathroom sink while she proceeded to undress and step into the shower. For a few moments, Raj hated himself for lowering the laptop screen. This wasn't why he was spying on his wife, and somewhere in his heart, he knew he was violating her privacy after she was dead, which made it worse. But then he lifted the screen once again to watch his wife bathing, still as glorious at 43 as she was 20 years ago when they had first met. Raj couldn't credit her genes for her fitness levels, for her 2 sisters were both overweight and looked 10 years older than their age. The credit was all Mira's. She loved swimming in the clubhouse and sweating it out in their backyard with her 10-kilogram kettlebell. With a twang of shame, Raj glanced at the tires of fat around his waist, which made it impossible to see his feet without leaning over. Maybe he deserved a wife who cheated on him. After all, he had completely let go of himself over the past 10 years. A factor, his doctor proclaimed, had contributed to Raj suffering a massive heart attack at 46, despite having no history of heart disease. Mira put on her glasses as she emerged from the bathroom and got dressed in a navy blue suit for her office meeting. Each Monday, she had a meeting with her boss, a man she detested but tolerated because it allowed her to provide for her family. As she combed her long, wavy hair and effortlessly styled them into a chignon, Raj caught his own reflection in the mirror on the bed behind her. A middle-aged, unshaven, unemployed man perched on the edge of the bed, wistfully watching his beautiful and successful wife, who was everything he wasn't. Did he feel resentful towards her? Was it her fault she had done well in her life, while he had simply failed at everything he tried? Was it love that still kept them together? Or was she only with him for the sake of their teenage daughter? "I'm going to be late today," she said, without glancing at her husband. "Today's the last date for the submission of the RFP response, and Kana would expect me to finish it before I finish my day." "How late?" he asked desolately. "Late," she said firmly, giving him an icy stare. "Eat your dinner if I'm not home by 8. I hope you can manage to feed yourself and Hina." It was more of a statement than a question. Raj heaved himself from the bed with much effort. "Let me get breakfast started. I'll eat in the office. Anyway, I can't eat anything before my Monday morning meeting, you know that." Through the camera, Raj saw his own sorry figure as Mira grabbed her purse and laptop bag and left the room without another word to him. She paused by their daughter's room, and after a perfunctory knock, opened the door and stepped in, closing the door behind her. Raj remembered sticking his ear to the door, eavesdropping on their conversation. But all he had heard were some muffled noises, as though they were deliberately trying to keep their voices down. It had started 2 months ago, when one night, Raj had woken up to find his wife's side of the bed empty and loud arguing noises coming from their daughter's room. As he had tiptoed to Hina's room, he heard his wife yelling, "Do you know how old you are? I'm 16. I'm not a child anymore. You're just 16. You're still a child. You cannot do this." "I can, and I will," the daughter had argued back. "I forbid you," and on and on. The argument had fired back and forth between mother and daughter until Raj had stepped into the room and both had frozen, and then sputtered an apology for waking him up. Docilely, Hina had apologized to her mother, and Mira had embraced her daughter. But Raj had sensed that it was just a temporary ceasefire owing to his heart condition, and the real issue between mother and daughter was not yet resolved. When he had probed about the subject of the argument, both had dilly-dallied without giving him the truth. While he appreciated their concern for his health, Raj wanted to be part of important discussions affecting their daughter and wasn't happy with being left out. Now he watched keenly as Mira stood facing their daughter, Hina, who was still in bed, as it was early for school. "Good morning, sweetheart," Mira said warmly. Hina, a scrawny 16-year-old girl with crazy curly hair, mumbled a good morning from under the covers. "I was leaving for office. I wanted to talk to you before I go," said Mira, sitting on the edge of the bed. Hina sat up on the bed, rubbing her eyes. "Yes, Mom. Is everything okay? Is Dad okay?" Raj's heart swelled with happiness at the concern he heard in his daughter's voice for his health. While not the most affectionate or expressive person in the room, Hina did show her love occasionally through her gestures. Mira sighed deeply. "Your dad's fine. He's recovering, you know. We can't let anything stress him out." Raj thought Hina looked away guiltily at her mother's words. "You know what I'm talking about, right?" Mira pressed on. "Yes, Mom. Have you met him again? Outside classes?" "No." "Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure, Mom." Mira's gaze dropped to the bed cover, and her delicate fingers smoothed out the covers. "I know you went to his house on Friday." Hina's expression was that of a deer caught in the headlights. I went to his house to say goodbye," she stammered. Mira's sigh was deep and audible. "I want to believe you. Really, I do. But I can't. You've broken my trust, Hina." Hina was now almost in tears. "I'm so sorry, Mom. But really, I had gone to his house for the last goodbye. I'll never see him again. Except at school, of course, where I can't avoid him." "Good. You know, once your dad is better, we'll do something to fix this problem permanently." Hina's ears perked up at the suggestion. "What do you mean, Mom?" "I mean, there's more we can do to fix this problem. I don't want to do anything right now because of your dad's precarious health. But once he's better, at this, Hina threw the covers and jumped out of bed. You can't punish him, Mom. It was my fault as much as his. Promise me you won't do anything. Mira rose, placing the strap of her laptop bag across her chest. I'm not promising anything, sweetheart. Let's talk about our options in a few weeks' time. Until then, if you see him again outside class, I'll know right away. Hina stared at the wall clock behind her mother's head. I won't see him like I promised. Raj's mind galloped to process the new information he had learned about his daughter. She had a boyfriend. Apparently, a boy from her class. Was that the reason for the strife between his wife and his daughter? Or was there more, he wondered, as he fast-forwarded the part of Mira's day where she attended her Monday morning meeting with her boss and worked in the office. Everything about the exchange surprised him because he was the overprotective parent, constantly worrying about every little thing regarding their daughter, while Mira was more of a liberal parent who allowed Hina to experiment and even encouraged mistakes, even though he thought it inadvisable for young people to date before 18. What Hina was going through was completely natural and expected. Why had his wife freaked out so much on finding out about Hina's boyfriend? Resuming the video from the point where Mira got into her Ford Endeavor after leaving office, Raj watched keenly as she checked her freshly applied lipstick in the rearview mirror and used her dainty hands to smooth her hair and tuck some wild strands behind her ear. She turned on the ignition and began driving in a direction opposite to where their home was located. When the police had questioned Raj about where his wife was returning from that fateful day, he had surmised that perhaps she had taken a detour to the market to shop for something for their daughter's upcoming 17th birthday. And maybe she had liked something, but wanted to discuss with her husband before buying the gift. Raj wasn't quite sure what had prevented him from sharing his suspicions with the police that his wife was probably having an affair and was returning from a rendezvous with the other man. It was probably as a token of respect for their 18-year-old marriage and consideration for their daughter that Raj had kept his suspicions to himself. With rapt attention, Raj watched the curve of the river, hugging the road, and the familiar city roads zipping past the fast-moving vehicle. As he expected, the car moved through the South City Market and towards the residential area next to it. Mira parked the car behind a dented Mahindra XUV 500, parked in the parking space, and stepped out with her purse over her shoulder. She rummaged through her purse for something, and apparently, not finding it in there, she leaned into the car, opened the glove compartment, and extracted a pepper spray. With the pepper spray ensconced in her purse, she marched to the front door and rang the bell. The pepper spray confused Raj. If she was going to meet her lover, He'd have expected her to be rummaging in her purse for something other than a pepper spray. The heavy brown door was opened by a balding man with horn-rimmed glasses on his nose. Mr. Segal? Hina's physics teacher? Was Mira having an affair with him? She detested the man and had even argued with him over some marks after the first term examination results. Nothing made sense. The man's face deflated on seeing the visitor. Raj thought Segal looked shocked to the point of being afraid on seeing Mira. Surprised? Said Mira. Why? Were you expecting my daughter? I don't know what you're talking about, the man stammered. I know you've been having a romantic relationship with my underage daughter. The man inhaled deeply. I have no idea what you're talking about. I have proof. Those letters you wrote to her. I found them, and I immediately knew they weren't written by a boy, but by a grown-up man. How could you do this? You're at least 50 years old. You disgust me. The man's nostrils flared with fury. Listen, you can't come to my doorstep and accuse me of something I haven't done. You need to leave, he said, beginning to close the door. Mira's ring-studded hand stopped the door from closing. I am leaving, but not before I warn you to stay away from my daughter. If you try to talk to her outside the class again, I'm going to inform the police. The only reason I haven't already contacted them is that Hina begged me. She begged me to let it go, and... Mira paused. The man was peering from behind the half-closed door with his narrowed eyes. And what? Mira sighed deeply. And nothing. I'm not calling the police right now because of my husband, who is ill. I don't want him to know about this mess. But if you contact my daughter again, I'll have no option but to call the police. Raj's world was spinning around him. So this was what the mother-daughter arguments were about. Now that he realized what had happened, it made perfect sense. Why then had his mind jumped to the conclusion that his wife was cheating on him, and the reason Hina was arguing with her mother was that she had somehow found out about her mother's affair? How could he have been so naive to jump to a disturbing conclusion based on a mere happenstance? The only thing Mira was trying to do was protecting their daughter from the pedophile and protecting her sick husband from the stress of the situation. The sudden onset of guilt at suspecting his innocent wife of cheating on him and violating her privacy made Raj sick in his stomach, having half a mind to close the laptop screen. Raj continued watching what was probably the last hour of his late wife's life. Soon, she would be on her way back home, and her Ford Endeavor would be hit on the rear by a vehicle that would send her spinning towards the river and to her death. Things seemed to be moving in slow motion as Mira delivered the final threat to the physics teacher, and leaving him with his jaw hanging, reversed her car out of the driveway, turning around towards her home. As she drove on the highway next to the river, Raj kept his gaze on her rearview mirror, his heart racing. If he was lucky, he'd be able to view the plate number of the vehicle that had hit his wife's car and hand over the evidence to the police. With his heart in his throat, Raj watched several large vehicles on the highway approaching his wife's car, and some of them overtaking it. Resisting an urge to tightly shut his eyes, Raj continued watching the last few minutes of his wife's life. What must be going on in her mind at the time, he wondered. He regretted not telling his wife how much he loved her and how much he appreciated her supporting the family, especially since he had lost his job. He regretted every harsh word he had said to his wife, every missed opportunity to appreciate her, each occasion he could have been kinder to her. Thinking of their arguments, and every time he had raised his voice at her, made him burn with shame. Was this his punishment for not living a purposeful life, for not living deliberately, but just drifting along the currents of everyday life? Raj sat bolt upright as he saw a vehicle he recognized approach his wife's car from behind. This couldn't be right. Why was the man following her? Raj knew the answer to the question a split second before he saw Segal ram his Mahindra XUV500 into his wife's car and send her spinning towards the river. Water engulfed the world around him, and he saw the bubbles of air escaping his wife's mouth and nose as the water pressure shattered the windows and rushed into the rapidly sinking car, drowning its only occupant. At some point in time, the glasses drifted away from Mira's face, and through the camera, Raj saw his wife's face for the very last time. Some of the guilt that Raj felt for violating his wife's privacy was washed away with the knowledge that he now had the evidence to bring his wife's murderer to justice. Wiping the tears from his eyes, Raj closed the video file and picked up the phone to dial the police. A life of regret. When Raj had stealthily installed the iSpy 200 Vision Plus device on his wife's prescription glasses 2 weeks ago, he had no idea the device would enable him to watch and hear from her perspective, in a way relive her last day alive. It was this morning Raj had received the Blue Dart courier with the pen drive containing the recording of the last day of Mira's life, her first and only day of wearing her glasses with the iSpy installed, just before the horrific car accident in which her car had been hit on the rear by another fast-moving vehicle. The police believed it to be a truck or a bus. Mira's Ford Endeavor had spiraled out of control and plunged into the river beside the road where she had drowned before she could be rescued. When her car had been pulled out, Raj had collected her things, including her glasses, and sent them to the technical facility of the I Spy Corporation in Mumbai, where the team had extracted the audio and video recorded on the device and mailed the file to Raj on a pen drive, along with a hefty check for their services. Taking a deep breath, Raj poured himself a glass of Sauvignon Blanc, which also happened to be Mira's favorite wine, for he needed his courage for what he was about to do. 3 large gulps and soothing warmth in his throat equipped him the nerve to plug in the pen drive and click on the folder dated July 24th, 2021. Wondering what their 16-year-old daughter Hina would think of this blatant breach of his wife's privacy, Raj pressed the play key. The world came into focus with dainty hands, with black painted fingernails, placing the glasses over a nose. The camera panned to the left and focused on the other side of the bed, where a portly man lay sleeping with his mouth slightly agape. Raj watched the laptop screen with his heart racing as Mira leaned closer and kissed his bearded face before wrapping her gown around her body and proceeding towards the bathroom. He paused and watched the affectionate gesture again, frowning. He must have been fast asleep because he didn't remember his wife kissing him in the past 3 months. Not since his near-fatal heart attack. Was there a corner of her heart that still loved him, even though she was cheating on him? Raj shrugged the thought away, and taking another sip of the wine, resumed playing the video. In the bathroom, Mira placed her glasses on the bathroom sink while she proceeded to undress and step into the shower. For a few moments, Raj hated himself for lowering the laptop screen. This wasn't why he was spying on his wife, and somewhere in his heart, he knew he was violating her privacy after she was dead, which made it worse. But then he lifted the screen once again to watch his wife bathing, still as glorious at 43 as she was 20 years ago when they had first met. Raj couldn't credit her genes for her fitness levels, for her 2 sisters were both overweight and looked 10 years older than their age. The credit was all Mira's. She loved swimming in the clubhouse and sweating it out in their backyard with her 10-kilogram kettlebell. With a twang of shame, Raj glanced at the tires of fat around his waist, which made it impossible to see his feet without leaning over. Maybe he deserved a wife who cheated on him. After all, he had completely let go of himself over the past 10 years. A factor, his doctor proclaimed, had contributed to Raj suffering a massive heart attack at 46, despite having no history of heart disease. Mira put on her glasses as she emerged from the bathroom and got dressed in a navy blue suit for her office meeting. Each Monday, she had a meeting with her boss, a man she detested but tolerated because it allowed her to provide for her family. As she combed her long, wavy hair and effortlessly styled them into a chignon, Raj caught his own reflection in the mirror on the chin behind her. A middle-aged, unshaven, unemployed man perched on the edge of the bed, wistfully watching his beautiful and successful wife, who was everything he wasn't. Did he feel resentful towards her? Was it her fault she had done well in her life, while he had simply failed at everything he tried? Was it love that still kept them together? Or was she only with him for the sake of their teenage daughter? "I'm going to be late today," she said, without glancing at her husband. Today's the last date for the submission of the RFP response, and Kana would expect me to finish it before I finish my day. "How late?" he asked desolately. "Late," she said firmly, giving him an icy stare. "Eat your dinner if I'm not home by 8. I hope you can manage to feed yourself and Hina." It was more of a statement than a question. Raj heaved himself from the bed with much effort. "Let me get breakfast started. I'll eat in the office. Anyway, I can't eat anything before my Monday morning meeting. You know that." Through the camera, Raj saw his own sorry figure as Mira grabbed her purse and laptop bag and left the room without another word to him. She paused by their daughter's room, and after a perfunctory knock, opened the door and stepped in, closing the door behind her. Raj remembered sticking his ear to the door, eavesdropping on their conversation. But all he had heard were some muffled noises, as though they were deliberately trying to keep their voices down. It had started 2 months ago, when one night, Raj had woken up to find his wife's side of the bed empty, and loud arguing noises coming from their daughter's room. As he had tiptoed to Hina's room, he heard his wife yelling, "Do you know how old you are? I'm 16. I'm not a child anymore. You're just 16. You're still a child. You cannot do this." "I can and I will," the daughter had argued back. "I forbid you." And on the argument had fired back and forth between mother and daughter, until Raj had stepped into the room, and both had frozen, and then sputtered an apology for waking him up. Docilely, Hina had apologized to her mother, and Mira had embraced her daughter. But Raj had sensed that it was just a temporary ceasefire owing to his heart condition, and the real issue between mother and daughter was not yet resolved. When he had probed about the subject of the argument, both had dilly-dallied without giving him the truth. While he appreciated their concern for his health, Raj wanted to be part of important discussions affecting their daughter, and wasn't happy with being left out. Now he watched keenly as Mira stood facing their daughter, Hina, who was still in bed, as it was early for school. "Good morning, sweetheart," Mira said warmly. Hina, a scrawny 16-year-old girl with crazy curly hair, mumbled a good morning from under the covers. "I was leaving for office. I wanted to talk to you before I go," said Mira, sitting on the edge of the bed. Hina sat up on the bed, rubbing her eyes. "Yes, Mom. Is everything okay? Is Dad okay?" Raj's heart swelled with happiness at the concern he heard in his daughter's voice for his health. While not the most affectionate or expressive person in the room, Hina did show her love occasionally, through her gestures, Mira sighed deeply. Your dad's fine. He's recovering, you know. We can't let anything stress him out. Raj thought Hina looked away guiltily at her mother's words. You know what I'm talking about, right? Mira pressed on. Yes, Mom? Have you met him again? Outside classes? No. Are you sure? Of course I'm sure, Mom. Mira's gaze dropped to the bed cover, and her delicate fingers smoothed out the covers. I know you went to his house on Friday. Hina's expression was that of a deer caught in the headlights. I went to his house to say goodbye, she stammered. Mira's sigh was deep and audible. I want to believe you. Really, I do. But I can't. You've broken my trust, Hina. Hina was now almost in tears. I'm so sorry, Mom. But really, I had gone to his house for the last goodbye. I'll never see him again. Except at school, of course, where I can't avoid him. Good. You know, once your dad is better, we'll do something to fix this problem permanently. Hina's ears perked up at the suggestion. What do you mean, Mom? I mean, there's more we can do to fix this problem. I don't want to do anything right now because of your dad's precarious health. But once he's better, at this, Hina threw the covers and jumped out of bed. You can't punish him, Mom. It was my fault, as much as his. Promise me you won't do anything. Mira rose, placing the strap of her laptop bag across her chest. I'm not promising anything, sweetheart. Let's talk about our options in a few weeks' time. Until then, if you see him again outside class, I'll know right away. Hina stared at the wall clock behind her mother's head. I won't see him like I promised. Raj's mind galloped to process the new information he had learned about his daughter. She had a boyfriend. Apparently, a boy from her class. Was that the reason for the strife between his wife and his daughter? Or was there more? He wondered, as he fast-forwarded the part of Mira's day where she attended her Monday morning meeting with her boss and worked in the office. Everything about the exchange surprised him because he was the overprotective parent, constantly worrying about every little thing regarding their daughter, while Mira was more of a liberal parent who allowed Hina to experiment and even encouraged mistakes, even though he thought it inadvisable for young people to date before 18. What Hina was going through was completely natural and expected. Why had his wife freaked out so much on finding out about Hina's boyfriend? Resuming the video from the point where Mira got into her Ford Endeavor after leaving office, Raj watched keenly as she checked her freshly applied lipstick in the rearview mirror and used her dainty hands to smooth her hair and tuck some wild strands behind her ear. She turned on the ignition and began driving in a direction opposite to where their home was located. When the police had questioned Raj about where his wife was returning from that fateful day, he had surmised that perhaps she had taken a detour to the market to shop for something for their daughter's upcoming 17th birthday. And maybe she had liked something, but wanted to discuss with her husband before buying the gift. Raj wasn't quite sure what had prevented him from sharing his suspicions with the police that his wife was probably having an affair and was returning from a rendezvous with the other man. It was probably as a token of respect for their 18-year-old marriage and consideration for their daughter that Raj had kept his suspicions to himself. With rapt attention, Raj watched the curve of the river, hugging the road, and the familiar city roads zipping past the fast-moving vehicle. As he expected, the car moved through the South City Market and towards the residential area next to it. Meera parked the car behind a dented Mahindra XUV 500, parked in the parking space, and stepped out with her purse over her shoulder. She rummaged through her purse for something, and apparently not finding it in there, she leaned into the car, opened the glove compartment, and extracted a pepper spray. With the pepper spray ensconced in her purse, she marched to the front door and rang the bell. The pepper spray confused Raj. If she was going to meet her lover, he'd have expected her to be rummaging in her purse for something other than a pepper spray. The heavy brown door was opened by a balding man with horn-rimmed glasses on his nose. Mr. Sehgal? Hina's physics teacher? Was Meera having an affair with him? She detested the man and had even argued with him over some marks after the first term examination results. Nothing made sense. The man's face deflated on seeing the visitor. Raj thought Sehgal looked shocked to the point of being afraid on seeing Meera. Surprised? Said Meera. Why? Were you expecting my daughter? I don't know what you're talking about, the man stammered. I know you've been having a romantic relationship with my underage daughter. The man inhaled deeply. I have no idea what you're talking about. I have proof. Those letters you wrote to her. I found them, and I immediately knew they weren't written by a boy, but by a grown-up man. How could you do this? You're at least 50 years old. You disgust me. The man's nostrils flared with fury. Listen, you can't come to my doorstep and accuse me of something I haven't done. You need to leave, he said, beginning to close the door. Meera's ring-studded hand stopped the door from closing. I am leaving, but not before I warn you to stay away from my daughter. If you try to talk to her outside the class again, I'm going to inform the police. The only reason I haven't already contacted them is that Hina begged me. She begged me to let it go, and... Meera paused. The man was peering from behind the half-closed door with his narrowed eyes. And what? Meera sighed deeply. And nothing. I'm not calling the police right now because of my husband, who is ill. I don't want him to know about this mess. But if you contact my daughter again, I'll have no option but to call the police. Raj's world was spinning around him. So this was what the mother-daughter arguments were about. Now that he realized what had happened, it made perfect sense. Why then had his mind jumped to the conclusion that his wife was cheating on him? And the reason Hina was arguing with her mother was that she had somehow found out about her mother's affair? How could he have been so naive to jump to a disturbing conclusion based on a mere happenstance? The only thing Mira was trying to do was protecting their daughter from the pedophile and protecting her sick husband from the stress of the situation. The sudden onset of guilt at suspecting his innocent wife of cheating on him and violating her privacy made Raj sick in his stomach. Having half a mind to close the laptop screen, Raj continued watching what was probably the last hour of his late wife's life. Soon, she would be on her way back home, and her Ford Endeavor would be hit on the rear by a vehicle that would send her spinning towards the river and to her death. Things seemed to be moving in slow motion as Mira delivered the final threat to the physics teacher, and leaving him with his jaw hanging, reversed her car out of the driveway, turning around towards her home as she drove on the highway next to the river. Raj kept his gaze on her rearview mirror, his heart racing. If he was lucky, he'd be able to view the plate number of the vehicle that had hit his wife's car and hand over the evidence to the police. With his heart in his throat, Raj watched several large vehicles on the highway approaching his wife's car, and some of them overtaking it. Resisting an urge to tightly shut his eyes, Raj continued watching the last few minutes of his wife's life. What must be going on in her mind at the time, he wondered. He regretted not telling his wife how much he loved her and how much he appreciated her supporting the family, especially since he had lost his job. He regretted every harsh word he had said to his wife, every missed opportunity to appreciate her, each occasion he could have been kinder to her. Thinking of their arguments, and every time he had raised his voice at her, made him run with shame. Was this his punishment for not living a purposeful life, for not living deliberately, but just drifting along the currents of everyday life? Raj sat bolt upright as he saw a vehicle he recognized approach his wife's car from behind. This couldn't be right. Why was the man following her? Raj knew the answer to the question a split second before he saw Segal ram his Mahindra XUV 500 into his wife's car and send her spinning towards the river. Water engulfed the world around him, and he saw the bubbles of air escaping his wife's mouth and nose as the water pressure shattered the windows and rushed into the rapidly sinking car, drowning its only occupant. At some point in time, the glasses drifted away from Mira's face and through the camera. Raj saw his wife's face for the very last time. Some of the guilt that Raj felt for violating his wife's privacy was washed away with the knowledge that he now had the evidence to bring his wife's murderer to justice. Wiping the tears from his eyes, Raj closed the video file and picked up the phone to dial the police. The hour approaches, gold and silver thread shimmer in my candlelit chamber. The figures of 3 noblewomen standing beneath a garden tree in the tapestry opposite feel as much part of me as the veins in my still, slender hands. One holds a bunch of flowers, one carries a basket of eggs, and the third stretches out her hand to a pelican. Symbol of motherhood, it is said the pelican will pluck its breast and feed the young on its own blood rather than see them starve. I can almost hear the mocking laughter of lives mercilessly cut short. In my dreams, the piercing cries of unquiet souls falsely accused. Grisly husks with popping eyes, whose contortions form a grotesque parody of life. Your time will come. We are waiting. The hour approaches, not if I keep standing, while the rest of my body crumbles. My ears hear well enough. In the early years, wigs lent majesty. Later, they covered the true extent of my hair loss. In my next dream, I enter a hall of mirrors, long forbidden in my palaces. Wigless and mask-free, I recoil at the gray tufts springing from a once noble crown. I'm dismayed by the sunken hollows that pass for cheeks, and my neck is a cavern of worms. I open my mouth to find stumps rattling in my jaw like beaten soldiers. My eyes, once glorious pools of gold brown, are blackened pits. I wake up yelling, and Cat is there to soothe my brow, as she did when I was a child. Yet Cat died years ago. You killed her with overwork. The hour approaches. Only last week, I was indulging in my favorite candies, and my neck was bedecked in a fine ruff with loops of hanging pearls. Since then, I've barely eaten, though my thirst is unquenchable. Knowing I no longer have the stomach for wine, my maids pour weak ale down my unprotesting throat. That way, I live longer. Pain and melancholy have been my bedfellows for so long. No amount of bloodletting of the body's humors can rid me of them. I must remain upright. I was once a tall, striking creature with auburn hair. Unfortunately, my womanly body was regarded as unfit to rule on account of its corruption, the result of Eve's fall from grace in the Garden of Eden. I had nightmares of a ghastly preacher shaking his fist at me and inveighing against the monstrous regiment of women whose ruling over men was deemed repugnant to nature. However, at the key moment, my imperfect flesh became wedded to the body politic. By some mysterious process, it rose above physical limitations and took on a perfect form. Early on, I learnt to suppress any sign of weakness and use my femininity as a weapon. Born under the sign of Virgo, I was married only to my people. As expressed in my clothing, I sacrificed self for their symbolic love. Over the years, this red-painted cochineal mouth has issued commands, witty rejoinders, sarcastic riposts. When it suited me, occasional snippets of wisdom. These childlike lips had courtiers running to do my bidding, trembling lest they displeased me and lost their heads. Little by little, I emerged from feebleness, impressing statesmen, and learned men alike. On my progresses through the country, I was said to have the common touch, waiting for hours to catch a glimpse. Ordinary people were touched by my concern for their comfort and welfare. Admittedly, there was precious little to be had in some of the city's hovels. You put on a good show. But the hour approaches. Finally, my supreme moment came. The defeat of the Spanish Armada turned my country's fortunes around. After exhorting the men encamped at Tilbury to victory before they set off in their cannoned ships, I emerged as Gloriana. I may have had the body of a feeble woman, but proved I had the heart and stomach of a king. Perhaps triumph entrenched me, made me more like my father. Loved and feared in equal measures, he bestrode the court like a colossus. A rule which started full of promise grew tyrannical. People feared for their lives. Now you fear for yours. The hour approaches, not if I keep standing. You may wonder how I could love a man who in one foul swoop instigated the destruction of my mother when I was not yet 3. My first brush with death. Even now, I'm unsure whether it was love or fear that drove our relationship. I never spoke to anyone directly about my mother, least of all the king when he lived. My early sagacity may have saved me during my most perilous moments. During my sister Mary's reign, my very survival hung in the balance. I died many times in my mind then. The consummate player, I played for the highest stakes and won by a hair's breadth. Even when I succeeded to the throne, I rarely let my guard down. Those I've truly trusted have been few and far between. But if I outranked them all in terms of flair, capacity, and intellect, I didn't do it alone. I took advice from the best counselors in the land, namely, my dear Cecil, who served me faithfully until he died a few years ago, and whose son now takes his place. Perhaps the older Cecil didn't always please me, but without him, the burden of politics presses heavily. The well of depression, which first opened when I lost Kat, my governess and dear friend, deepened. I miss her. Take those leeches away, and let me have some peace. Nay, none of it feels like winning now. There's nothing triumphant about lying swaddled in a heap of cushions, even if they are in Richmond Palace's private quarters. Our family often decamped here to escape the turmoil of state affairs. Yet this dreamscape of towers and turrets overlooking the river has become a glorified prison. A servant stokes the fire, keeping off the last of winter's chill before spring's sweet arrival, which I won't see. With each passing day, my ladies add more cushions, so when my legs buckle from the strain of standing for hours, no bones get broken. You need to rest and get some sleep, Your Majesty, except to lie down is to face death. Your hour approaches. Ignoring the doctor's wheedling, I remain fixed as the northern star. He and Cecil work in tandem. The smooth politician, who isn't a patch on his father, and the oily medic grown greedy on royal patronage. Between them, they will pluck the name of my successor from their childless queen's lips, if it's the last thing they do. Of course, I should never have agreed to have the coronation ring removed from my finger to relieve the swelling. I'd not taken it off since my coronation all those years ago, and nothing has been right since. However, I'm adamant that my mother of pearl locket ring remains on my finger for as long as I breathe. What happens next is beyond my control. I trust the women who wait on me will honor my wishes. Only 2 weeks ago, I was able to cast the pain aside and demand my wardrobe mistress clothe me in a fine linen dress and put a ruff round my neck. Enduring the discomfort of hoop and bustle, my face was covered in a thick layer of white lead makeup to cover the pox I was left when I caught smallpox as a young queen. The daubing of my wrists in sweet perfume made me feel almost human. Now sunken in cushions, the chime of bells reaches across our fading fields. I catch the tail end of whispers, infuriated at not being able to hear precisely what's being said. I can no longer demand they tell me or suffer the consequences. The nightmare of that fortress rising above me is upon me again. At the time, the sight of the royal prison almost unhinged me, but a mistress of deception must survive such trials. My elder sister Mary was ruling the country with a rod of iron, and the stakes were kept busy dealing with dissenters. To be so fierce in her beliefs may have been my sister's undoing. When I first became queen, I refused to make windows into men's souls. So long as people conformed to the Anglican religion carved out by my father, they had no need to fear. Yet in your reign, you've ordered more deaths than your sister. Your hour approaches. The very mention of the tower would make the most hardened traitor's bowels shrivel, especially with the threat of torture. As a member of royalty, I would not have to suffer the horrors of Wyatt and his supporters when their rebellion failed. Although I distanced myself from all plots to overthrow my sister, every failure put me in peril. With rumors and counter-rumors circulating of my complicity, I daily faced the threat of destruction. I vividly remember that journey to the tower, passing scenes of horror and desolation. heads and body parts mounted on spikes at the city's gates displayed the consequence of treason. As we approached, I heard the blood-curdling roar of its lions and turned feverish. To be revisiting the place where my mother had spent her last days, and to have to endure interrogation, seemed beyond me. But I kept my resolve. Any consolation in being given pleasant rooms was short-lived when I discovered the only means of stretching my legs meant having to pass the site of my mother's scaffold. If it came to it, I'd planned on asking for a French sword rather than the cumbersome axe. My mother had made exactly that request before her execution, and then had to suffer the agonies of waiting for my father to grant her wish. Much later, I learnt there was talk of sparing her and allowing her to flee to a nunnery. When the king's love turned sour, he had punished her failure to produce a male heir by getting Cromwell, his clever and formidable politician, to accuse her of numerous acts of treason. They included witchcraft and adultery, including with her own brother. No woman's name was more besmirched. She had been called the king's whore before he made her queen. But she met her death with dignity, making a wise speech to the gathered crowd. In a stroke, she was dead, but not dishonored. I gleaned the details of my mother's final days, long after her death. I dimly recall seeing her as a child. I did not live with her, and when her deliveries of lovely clothes dried up, I sensed something was wrong. In the flickering candlelight, they have coaxed me to bed, where the dark night hovers waiting for my soul. I've always been surrounded by people wanting something. The country's most senior men wait here, watchdogs to a diminishing power. Even a queen cannot hold back death forever. The hour approaches. My physician presses my wrist and clears his throat. Your Majesty, there's the matter of the post-mortem? No cutting, but with great humility. It can be helpful to know the cause of illness for future understanding and inquiries. No, and, the issue of embalming? No, it is usual practice with royalty. No, of course, Your Majesty. His shoulders slump. He will have nothing interesting to report for posterity. The Archbishop arrives carrying oils. Must speak. Alone. My voice cracks. Everyone to go. In the silence, the Archbishop reaches for my hand. I dreamed of Mary again, I whisper. Which one? Your sister? Or the other one? My cousin. She was the Queen of Scotland. I should never have signed the death warrant. I didn't mean it to be sent. It had to be, Your Majesty. She was complicit in the Babington plot. I tell you, my hand was forced. It was unseemly. I fear God will judge me harshly. Yet, while your cousin lived, you were in constant danger. She was your ultimate rival. But then the manner of her death. Arg. She was not felled straight away. I heard her daw, ran out from under her dress, howling. And then they dipped his nose into her blood. Bitter tears form runnels in my makeup. To go the grave with such thoughts is abominable. What is done cannot be undone, Your Grace. But will I be pardoned for my sins? You will be pardoned and treated as a queen in heaven, as you are on earth. But his voice lacks conviction. Have you thought any more about the most pressing matter? The kiss of his lips to my hand is like the flutter of a bee's wings over a honey pot. They need to know. Who will it be? A vacant tear falls onto the pillow. I have no heirs, so it will have to be Mary's son, James. But I'm damned if they're getting it out of me till I'm ready. They plagued me to marry and produce an heir, although no man ever pleased them. I played along with their schemes, kept them dangling while they sought out the best alliances. My maids were bribed to report the regularity of my monthly bleeds, but in the end, nothing could induce me. When it came to it, I couldn't allow a man to rule over me. Not even Dudley, who I almost loved, at least until our ardors dampened to the warmth of friendship. But how could I forget what happened to my mother when she married my father? And his love turned to hate. Or how my sister's husband deserted her and returned to Spain, leaving her bereft and childless. I played all proposed alliances off against one another, secretly resolved to remain single. No matter that the cushions have been removed. I request the assistance of my ladies to help me out of bed so I can see the tennis court from the window. I remember Dudley, long gone, playing hopelessly to amuse me. He was, however, a fine horseman, and we spent hours riding together. The only time I felt truly free. My chief counselor strides over, touches my shoulder. Your Majesty must go to bed. A knight and leader of the Privy Council he may be, but I will not abide such insolence from a whippersnapper. Little man, you do not use the word must to princes. Your father would not have spoken so. The truth is as bitter as gall. Knowing I must soon leave this life makes him presumptuous. England will have but one queen and no master. The roar of the lion is in my ears. At my coronation, I wore my mother's crown. It fitted me well, lying in bed, strangled by unspoken words. Their waxen faces loom, pressing for the name of my successor. Will it be James of Scotland, Your Grace? My mind flips back, and I'm riding in the barge along the Thames, heading towards the tower again. I keep telling myself I'm a passenger, not a prisoner, but my body has swollen. After my sister, I am the rightful heir to England's throne. My father restored my legitimacy at a grand ceremony in 1544. These men cannot get the better of me. I'm a queen in waiting, popular with the people. I cannot be harmed. Sickened by the boat's motion, I cry out, Let us pull over, so I may recover. The warehouses line the north bank, rising up like monsters from the deep. I've slept in many beds during my life's course, often with maids, occasionally alone, never with a man, though a number tried. The one here is appropriately boat-shaped and sumptuously draped with sea green curtains, composed of flesh, blood, and mottled bruises. I will the lungs beneath my chest to keep breathing. In and out, in and out. Mere mortal that I am. Your procrastinating must end. The hour fast approaches. Jay. The name sticks like a craw in my throat. Did you hear that? The Archbishop asks breathlessly. She can't speak. In air now grown fetid, my finger draws a circle. She's making the shape of a crown. My lady of the bedchamber understands, as does Kat, my old governess, returned to help me in my final trial. Is it to be James, the King of Scotland? Cecil's voice, low and urgent, breaks through the gloom. She's nodding consent, the Archbishop says. She keeps fiddling with the locket. What's in it? Leave it. Kat covers my hand. No man dare argue. In such moments, women protect their own. The ring has 6 rubies, and the letters E and R. The letter E has diamonds set over it, and the R is enameled in blue. But the ring bears a secret. Within the hinged head lie 2 miniature portraits, one of myself and another of an unnamed woman wearing a French hood. I imagine their gasps on opening it. She bears the look of... Kat will likely puff out her chest and tell them there was never any doubt she was her father's daughter. You only had to look at her. But God bless her, she was her mother's daughter too. Lingering on the threshold, my soul must finally meet its maker. I hear Kat's voice loud and clear. Open the windows so the queen can smell the fresh cut grass. It's being pecked at by a rook. No more prevarication. My hour has come. Renaissance. The view from the first floor bedsit window tonight was dreary. Great drifts of spume hurtled across the road, leaving shallow lakes to creep across the promenade and pour back into the ocean. Richard turned away and sat morosely on the threadbare chair beside the bed, dully regarding the marked and faded wallpaper, the fly-specked single light bulb oscillating gently in the draft from the ill-fitting windows. He turned his attention to the faded and patterned floor covering. If he looked closely, images danced before his eyes. The head of a huge silverback gorilla stared belligerently at him. Elsewhere, gibbons swung elegantly from a treetop. A demon glared at the periphery of his vision. But his favorite of all, which he could discern the most easily, a lissom and naked young woman, leaning invitingly against a door frame, with raised knee shielding the promise of a hinted pudenda. He tore his eyes away and checked his watch. 5 o'clock. A long time yet. Then the usual Wednesday footsteps pittered along the hallway below, as he had known they would, and splashed down the entrance steps and onto the footpath. He craned his neck and saw the familiar, rain-coated figure, umbrella turned into the wind, pittering along the street, ridiculous high-heeled shoes dancing amongst the puddles. They were red. They always were. He watched the figure until it rounded the corner. Once gone, it was as if it had never existed. Ephemeral, like life itself. The heavy overcast drew the fading light into full darkness sooner than it might have, but much too soon yet. All that could be done was to watch the street lamps down the length of the promenade floating in their own pools of shifting light, like so many illuminated masts in harbor. Their reflected light sending streamers of rain, runneling almost horizontal on the outside of the windows. Richard switched on his own, gently swinging light bulb. Instantly, in the window's reflective depths, the ghost of his sallow face stared blankly back with haunted eyes. He turned off the light, and his ephemeral self blinked out. Another ghost laid to rest, dark. He closed his eyes. Without light, the harsh demarcation of the four corners of the room became infinity. He floated in its comforting, amniotic embrace, attached to the present only by an umbilical whipcord of anxiety. In the end, the pull proved too much, and he was drawn back to harsh reality, like the sudden deliverance of a breech birth hacked into being by the surgeon's knife. He strode across to the window to ease his cramping muscles. The fight, already lost, as he had known it would be, reborn. His night eyes saw the darkness bleeding rivers, shedding blood-thick tears down the outside of the window pane, reflected from the passing car's tail lights and the wildly tossing promenade lights, to pool gelatinous on the windowsill. He imagined he felt a wetness on his hands, a warm and glutinous, congealing wetness. He followed the raindrops across the window with his finger and left on the inside an imaginary, sanguine tracery. He looked at his hands as if for the first time, wondering at their unfamiliarity, their symmetry, their grossness, recognizing their disguised strength beneath the tremor, recognizing also that the unsteadiness was an excitement taken beyond control that shivered its way down the length of his body, a thirst that demanded to be slaked. The night was full dark now. He opened the door and left softly. The outer door swung shut behind him, a sepulchral sound entombing the stillness of the musty hallway. He paused, head hooded against the needling rain, and peered through the sheeting curtains that obscured the view one moment, then swept on the next. The promenade swam with color, a surrealist nightmare of spiraling light and plunging shadow. By comparison, he felt himself a monochrome shade, an empty vessel, drifting powerless in a roaring ocean of color that had no other purpose than to toss him to and fro until his destiny had been fulfilled, and then return him spent to his harbor, bereft, befouled, bedizened, red, blood red, red. The pavement orgasmed with the color. Pools of liquid carmine shimmered at his feet, as fitful as a broken promise, pigmented only by the festooning lights. Once around the corner, away from the promenade's glitter, the pooling rain became dark and wet and cold again, and Richard's head cleared. The madness was at his back now, but his way still lay forward. Into the dark, the street in front was empty. Houses on each side, isolated cocoons of brick and light and love. The only sound that of Richard's footsteps measuring their length through the puddles, and the gurgle of rain cascading down the gutters. Richard slipped a hand inside his coat pocket and caressed the slivered blade that nestled there. The ice-keen touch upon his skin raised the hackles of his neck. Waves of anticipation raced down his spine and through his fingers, which spasmed. The stiletto point pricked, and he withdrew his hand to savor the sensation. Blood globbled on his fingertip like a black polyp, and Richard raised it to his eyes in fascination. Then it was dashed away by the rain, which carried it in thin streamers across his hand. He put it to his mouth and sucked, refreshed by the cool wetness of the rain, seasoned with the heavy tang of his own blood. He suckled a moment, then moved on. Like a fading echo, he kept to the shadows, flitting from doorway to doorway, avoiding the ubiquitous, questing cameras with the ease of long familiarity. Narrow alleys drifted by to his left, dark, anonymous canals choked with the jetsam of urban life. He passed these by. An island of brilliance signaled further on, neon lights searing holes in the dark, caking the road with an impasto of color, so thick, so scarlet, so palpable, and yet as insubstantial as breath. Richard's own breath came with slow, measured control, resting so low and soft in his throat that it could have been a purr. He took shelter in a deep shop doorway, transfixed by the neon flicker, and waited. Cars planed by, streaming rubied skeins beneath their wheels. The sound of tires, louder than their engines. In the glow of the neon lights, car doors opened, clunked shut. Voices cried, footsteps splashed, running, pattering up the steps of the cinema, and halted while hands flapped, shook at sodden raincoats, then hurried on into the foyer to be swallowed up, lost to a world as transient as their own. Brief lives Richard watched and waited, measuring the passing time by the measure of his breath. It beat in time with his pumping heart. Red, 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 red blood red, red blood red. Outgoing picture-goers from the early program began to trickle out, raising umbrellas against the rain, in pairs, in groups, singly. Richard left the shelter of the doorway, heading for the car park. The cinema car park was small and little used, emptying quickly now as the patrons swept homewards to their fires and their families. Richard mingled briefly with the slowing trickle of incoming patrons as he made his way to the rear of the building, with the occasional patron leaving by the convenient rear exit. He edged into a gap between the bulk refuse containers and the boiler housing and melded into the dark. His position commanded a sweep of the car park entrance on the one hand, and on the other, a view of the few remaining cars. One by one, they cleared as their passengers scampered by his hiding place, family groups squealing against the lashing rain, individuals going their separate ways. Richard's heart pounded with the effort of holding still, of awaiting the moment. And the moment came. A lone figure scampered down the short flight of steps, down from the rear fire exit, last to leave, as it always was, coat drawn over its head, red shoes pittering their regular Wednesday footsteps, as they had pittered earlier in the evening. Silent as shadow, Richard stepped out, staying a startled gasp with a hand cupped across the figure's mouth, and drew it to the shelter of the bins. His fingers clamped hard across its face, whilst terrified eyes stared wildly into his own snake pit pupils. Arms and legs flailed, then stiffened in shock as Richard drew his knife and stilled the working mouth with a single thrust, skewering the blade into the palate through the base of the jaw. Lips grimaced in pain, eyes squeezed tight shut against the nightmare, chest heaving with a locked-in scream. Blood welled in the mouth, down the nose, trickled, flowed, torrented. The slick, sensuous feel caressed Richard's fingers as it channeled down the blade. At its touch, he jerked the blade free, the jaw gagging slack, and drove it between the breasts and up, working it inward, twisting, grating. Rich, dark blood bubbled, gouted from the gaping mouth, spouted with air expelled from the riven lungs. He withdrew the blade and stared at questing eyes that glazed over as he watched, supporting the body that slumped in his grasp, and as the head lolled, let the woman drop like a discarded rag. Richard stood over the huddled heap, spent, supporting himself on the wall, watching with lackluster eyes the dark pool spreading from the placental evisceration of the torn body. The rain lapped at the edges, washing it away in rivulets. He stepped out into the car park and walked quietly away, head bowed against the rain, in common with the other few pedestrians hurrying home for shelter. As though in expiation, the rain lashed down even harder, washing the body clean, rinsing the blood into the gutters. Richard pulled his hood down across his tormented eyes, then hunched his shoulders against the torrent. Behind him, the faint sound of laughter mocked from within the cinema. He let the laughter wash over him dully and raised his face to the sky, mingling its tears with his own. The glistening street arrowed back to the seafront, a dark, lonely fairway to a hopeless harbor, leaving death behind. Leaching into the rain, he drew a shuddering breath and took a first, hesitant step home, reborn once more to a hopeless, pointless life, until the next dead, red rain time. And on the vinyl floor, the demon leered, "Gardener's World, you've chosen a good time to pay me a visit. I've pulled up some pretty decent leeks this morning. Got some lovely onions in the store and a rosemary bush that is totally oblivious to all the nonsense that seems to have befallen our world. My garden really has been my savior, my little farm. I can grow what I need and get by very nicely on what my garden supplies. I do wish I'd had a better crop of carrots. I used the finest bone meal fertilizer, but they were a total bust this year. My soil is a little too heavy for them, too much clay. But it's the carrot fly that really did for them. They said our biggest enemy was the sickness. Then they tried to say it was the foreign governments. Then it was all about misinformation and the enemy within. But I survived because I knew all along my only real enemy is carrot fly. When the gas supply was cut off back in 25, I opened up an old fireplace so I could cook on an open flame indoors. Not a pretty job, no power tools, naturally. So, me and Axe had to do most of the heavy work, hacking out the wall they'd used to gag the old hearth. I like it though. The exercise, solving problems, working out a plan to get me to the next crop. Most of the stuff we've lost, I didn't care for anyway. You're lucky today with the weather. It gets too smoky and hot indoors, even with the chimney. No, on a day like this, we cook al fresco. Something lovely about doing my cooking in the place where I get most of my food. I'm a man of nature. That's what I am. You saw my roses on the way in, didn't you? It's the roses and the raspberry canes that bring people to my garden. I took part of the fence down so people can see them more easily, so they can come in and explore. Fancy that. In times like these, Someone actually taking part of a good, strong fence down. Well, there's method to my madness. I like to have visitors. Brought you here to me today, didn't it? Relax. Enjoy the sun. Would you like some water? I've got plenty. Since the neighbors have been thinning out, I've been using their houses' guttering, as well as my own, to collect the rain. Been able to grow in their gardens, too. That's why I'm doing so well in these tough times. That's why I can afford to lose a few raspberries to curious, hungry bypassers. Waste nothing and work hard. That's me. Do whatever needs to be done. Please, have some water. But how is he going to cook out here, you ask? A very good question. Let me just remove this old tarp. And ta-da! An old enamel bath. Not as common as they once were. But this beautiful old iron roll top was in my neighbor's place. He was a lawyer in the old days. Fat lot of good that did him. Must have cost a fortune. Weighs a ton. I convinced them to help me carry it here in exchange for some food and water. And here we are, those old claw and ball feet holding it up above my fire. An antique bath sitting on my lawn in the shade of my willow. Heaven, you look a bit concerned. Don't worry about the staining on the sides of the bath. That's inevitable when you cook with direct heat like this. It looks dirty, but it's not. It's just well seasoned from all the grease and juices. I'll just get this fire lit. Thank you for gathering all of this wood, by the way. Told you I'd trade you for water and the raspberries, didn't I? I'm a man of my word. We'll need a couple of buckets of water for the tub. And what else? I think today we'll have a couple of these leeks. No carrots, though. Curse you, carrot fly. And I think we'll have a big, dirty handful of the fresher stems from my gnarly old rosemary bush. Don't worry, the heat will kill the germs. I'll use some of this too. Take a look. It's a pot of fat. My grandma would have called it dripping. You must keep this stuff. It's more valuable than gold, literally, these days. I preserve it whenever I cook. It's full of calories and protein and goodness. It keeps for ages. I've got a cupboard full of it. This is from the last few rabbits I cooked. It's a bit of a cocktail, to be honest. Rabbits, rats, squirrels, street rats, raspberry thieves. Only joking, they weren't thieves. You're not a thief. I can spare a few raspberries. I'm going to get this beautiful stuff, nice and hot, and then get the leeks in there. Then the water and the rosemary. Axe, get over here, you big lump. He looks brutal, but I keep him sharp enough to chop the leeks. Look, he's bright as a sushi knife. I can use him to shave. Look close. There now, a slice of leek you can see through. That will just melt in the fat. My mouth is watering. Did you hear that? I love that sound, that sizzle. The popping twigs under the bath, the first chunk of leek sliding around in there, in all that greasy goodness, hissing and cackling. The sun weeping through the old willow. No more horrible planes overhead, no traffic, no more reports about all the doom and gloom, no more sirens, just a sizzle and a pop, and the waft of home cooking on the late summer breeze. Potatoes. How could I forget potatoes? I sometimes think I'm losing my mind. Not many of this year's crop left, but this is the best way to use them. They add body. Oh, that was unintentional, sorry. Please don't be upset. Poor taste has no place in my garden. Well, I must say, it's been nice to have someone to talk to other than Axe. It has been a while. The raspberries will be dying off soon, and the roses won't last for much longer after that. I suspect I'll be getting fewer visitors. But never mind. I'm going to have plenty of provisions to keep me strong over the winter. And there's still blackberries out, so you never know. I'll be fine in the house, sleeping in the cellar with Axe. Anyway, looks like we've got a rolling boil going here, so sorry, but it's bath time.